Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Charmley, and this rather gloomy building is the Church of St Michael, Upton Cressett. It's gloomy because there's no electric light and it's surrounded by trees, and it's a bit of a dull day out there, but I've got an artificial light here, an electric light here, and I'll use that to illuminate things as we go around. This is a Norman church. It's no longer in use. It's now redundant, cared for by the Church's Conservation Trust. You can see why it's redundant, to be honest. It was very much dependent on the big house, and the big house having servants and lots of people working on the farms. And of course, even though the big house today is indeed lived in, is indeed used, you haven't got loads of servants, you haven't got loads of farm workers. We live in a much more mechanised era today. This is a Norman building, and as we look around, we'll see some of the Norman features. It's one of a number of interesting Norman buildings, very close to each other. We've been in previous videos to Aston Ayr and Morville Priory, and then Upton Cressett is the third in these three interesting Norman buildings. Here again, we have a building that's tiny building. It has been enlarged, and it has also been contracted over the years, and as we look around, we'll see some evidence of these changes. So let's have a look around. As usual, because that's the right place to start, we start at the west end, looking to this Norman chancel arch looming out of the gloom here. And at the west end is the font. And I do have a light here, so there is the font. Again, this nice Norman carving all the way around the outside. Sometimes of course, what they would do is they'd start at one point and they'd work around. And sometimes you get like that. There's this little arch that's not quite the right size. It's open. You can see here, you could put a very young baby in there quite nicely. There's an old painting of the crucifixion, quite worthless at the back there. A doorway, and as we look at the doorway, we can see that is Upton Cressett Hall. And the hall, because we'll see outside that there's a big manor house, and then there's the gatehouse. Some Victorian pews. On this wall, on the north wall, you've got an arcade that is now blocked, and that tells us, the columns are the very latest 13th century. There is an aisle that has been pulled down as the village has shrunk. Here we have the Norman arcade, or the Norman chancel arch, and as we bring the light in, you can see here dogtooth moulding. The pulpit is Jacobean, 17th century, but on a later base. And this tiny little chancel, which is of course quite typical of Norman buildings, as we saw at Aston Ayr. It's not a big building. There's a number of reproductions of religious art here. There is here the communion table. Obviously that is thoroughly fixed in place so that villains cannot steal it. And anyone who would, quite frankly, well, should get him going to trouble. There is a side chapel here. This would have been used as a place of, probably it would have been used as a burial place, as a private chapel for the big house family. We have here the bier. The bier is, of course, it's used for carrying the dead to church from their homes. There is here a reproduction, I believe, of a brass, and you can see a nice 17th century outfits there. The real one is going to be some of safekeeping. Wall paintings. There are at least 2 layers of wall painting visible here, possibly 3. This is part of the problem with uncovering wall paintings, is what do you uncover? We don't go in today, there's a Schleiermacher and Troy, destroy everything except the bit we like, and therefore usually wall paintings are kept mostly covered to protect them, and because it's generally felt we can't choose what to do. You'll notice here there's a nice Victorian roof. The big house spent some time in dereliction, but it's now much loved and much used. There's some evidence of water coming into the roof here, but restoration work will happen when funds are available. There is, of course, no tower here. There is a belfry at the west end, and there's the doorway. So we'll go out to the doorway, and I'll turn off the light and lamp, and we'll head for the doorway here. So here's the doorway. Try and do this in one continuous take. Out through the doorway, and watching the steps, because we go up. The church is on a hill. You can see there's the big house at the top of the slope, and the church is lower down. So you go down into the church, not up into the church. It's Upton Cressett, but what is up, particularly at Upton, and up, of course, Upper Town, is the big house, the manor house, which occupies most of it. It's raining quite notably here now, so I'll be a little bit quick on the outside because I don't really want to get the camera too wet. So there's the big house, and there you can see the gatehouse, which is a separate structure. And we'll just go out a bit and turn around, and the big house family will be able to very quickly go down to the church in the morning, and if it was raining like it is now, they would have minimum amount of time to get wet in. So this, and you've got these table tombs. Table tombs are high status, but also they have this thing that if you do have issues with people trying to take bodies, well, there's a whacking great lump over it. But it's a status thing. We are important enough to have table tombs. And you can see there's the little belfry, and there's the chapel built out from the Norman church. The chapel is a later addition, of course. The Norman church would have been very much what we saw at Aston Ayre, where you have this two-cell structure with a little tiny, and here we have, we'll just pop in briefly into the porch and then have another looking porch at the conclusion because it's raining. We have here, there's a nice look at the woodwork here. This is surely a medieval porch. You just see here that the woodwork of the porch partially obscures the Norman doorway. The tympanum here is plain. It may very well have been painted, and in fact almost certainly there's traces of paint in it now, but some of that paint's going to be late medieval, and probably not even later than that. You've got your Norman doorway, your cluster of columns either side, and we'll just have a look around the back because that's where we noted inside that there was an aisle. There isn't any more. Aisles are very often built on the north side just because the north side gets the least light, and so building an aisle on the north side blocks out less light than building one on the south. So there we are. You can just see there's two arches there on the north side. Well, let's go back into the porch then for the wrap up. And so here we are in the porch. That is Upton Cressett Church. It's sad to see some of these buildings become redundant, but this is one of those cases where you look at it and you go, well, there's two other very, very good Norman churches in the area. The places where people actually live, for the most part, are nearer those two. And so this one sadly had to be not abandoned, but is no longer used for regular worship. The hall does open at weekends, and of course the church then gets visitors. So it remains very much a heritage asset for the area. But there's no congregation to keep it going, unfortunately. But what does the future hold? God alone knows. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you until next time.